Jamie, you and I have been talking about a podcast for quite a while now, and we both have unique perspectives. You have an amazing background in finance. I've studied leadership, and I think the combined it gives us an opportunity to challenge and better understand some of the decisions that our leaders are making today. So, with that, you actually recommended that we start with tariffs. So,
It's a
tariffs
hot
are
topic
hard.
right now. Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's very difficult, and but it is something that is affecting every single person, regardless of whether you're an investor like I am or you're just going to the grocery store. Tariffs are going to affect you hard and hard.
So let's start just with the basics. And since you're the finance expert, you get to explain this. What exactly, like in simple, normal person language, is a tariff?
It's a tax. That's exactly what it is. It is a
Mhm.
tax on goods that cross a border. So the way tariffs work is that when any sort of good enters a country, they have to go through customs. And when they get to the customs, the value of those goods are assessed. And if there's going to be any taxes or tariffs on them, they must be paid at that point of entry. So for us, the tariffs are going to be we get to like a ship coming over from China. It's going to
Mhm.
dock in Seattle, say, and it's going to assess what is on that boat and it's going to have to pay the tariff in order to unload those goods here in the United States. That's going to raise the price of those goods by to the buyer of that good, who will then probably end up passing it on to the ultimate buyers of those goods. We'll see how that works because that's actually the crux of the problem right now.
Got it. And so, why do governments implement these tariffs, these taxes?
Tariffs have a very rich history, actually. And the United States used to have a lot of tariffs. If you go way, way back before we even had income tax, there was a time before income tax, about 1913 is when we started putting income tax in this country. Actually, almost all of the government revenue came through tariffs. So the imported goods, that's how they collected revenue, the government operated. It's when we shifted towards taxing our own citizenry through income tax that you started seeing those tariffs kind of go away. Now, we've gone back and forth several times over the past, say, 115 years about whether we want to add more tariffs or not. And we do have selective tariffs now on certain products to try to protect certain industries within the United States. But as we have gone through and tried to get closer and closer to economic ties amongst other countries, because it is the number one way to prevent wars, according to all of the research, we have started seeing tariffs go away further and further and further to the point where the average tariff before we had Trump enter office was about 3%. Now, there are lots of different items out there that are more than 3%. There were some that were less than 3%, but the average tariff burden was only 3%.
Got it. And so, and I had been reading that some governments use tariffs to protect specific industries, and not all the tariffs, the recent tariffs, have come in the Trump administration. I believe the Biden administration implemented some tariffs in 2024. Can you talk to us a little bit about the timeline of tariffs just in like the last, I don't know, decade or so, or maybe
Uh,
even year?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the North Atlantic Trading Agreement, NAFTA, right? So
Mm.
that is where a lot of the tariffs that were in place started disappearing as we started getting closer ties to most of our trading partners. Okay. Then we started seeing selected industries start getting carve outs about it. So if we fast forward all the way to the Biden administration, which you're talking about in 2024, we saw electrical vehicles and then more importantly, semiconductors were getting tariffed. The reason that we put tariffs on those particular items is they are new technology. It is quite expensive to develop that technology. So to try to prevent the nascent technology here in the United States from dying, we wanted to put protection or barriers up to help the US based semiconductor industry, EV industry from foreign competition. So
Now,
that is what, yeah, go ahead.
oh, no, that's great. Now, as I understand it, China did the same thing with the electric car industry. Isn't that right? Like, didn't they prevent any external, or they just taxed the heck out of external EV companies so while their own workers figured out the technology?
That's exactly right. And that's the whole point, right? You're trying to give your workers the ability to develop the technology to such an efficient scale that you can be competitive on a world stage. So while we were taxing Chinese EVs over here, they were taxing Teslas. Let's be honest, it was mainly
Mhm.
Teslas over there in an attempt to level the playing ground in each of those respective industries. We don't know who's going to dominate the worldwide industry in the EV area, but that is why you see Teslas here in the United States and not a lot of Chinese cars. And you go over to China and you won't find Teslas, you'll find mainly their local brands.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So we just talked about that tariff from the Biden administration on EVs, solar, semiconductors. Then what happened? Or can you tell us essentially like what was the baseline before this year?
Oh, this is going to be, let's see here.
You can do it. You can put it in normal Cindy terms.
It is difficult. So up until this point, we had very low tariffs. Okay. The whole point of it was to keep free trade going on. The problem is that we started seeing bigger and bigger trade deficits with other countries. And there's a few ways to deal with those trade deficits. One of the ways, and the way that the current administration is trying to figure out how to deal with it, is by putting in tariffs. We may be able to protect American industry, make it relatively cheaper compared to foreign products coming in, thus giving a boost to the American industry. At the same time, anything that we are importing in, the government gets a nice big fat check on. So,
Mhm.
because of the tariff, and as a result, they can use that to help reduce the trade deficit that is going on. The whole point of this is that we have been buying a whole lot more than we have been selling to other nations. Now, there's a little bit of a problem with a lot of this math because, to be honest, the United States tends to export services and we
Right.
tend to import physical goods. So it is not exactly apples to apples. And this stuff is incredibly hard to measure. But by every measure that's out there, we import a lot more than we export. And so by putting in tariffs and making these imports a lot more expensive, that's going to drop how much we import because it's now going to be more economical to make it at home in an attempt to even out that deficit. That is the ultimate goal of the tariffs. If it works, we bring industry back into the United States. We may generate more United States jobs, all of these really good economic benefits. The problem is there is risk. Number one, we don't have the infrastructure here on a lot of this material. So it's not like we can just, be a genie and blink and bam, we've got a factory overnight that can produce some of this stuff. We do not have very high unemployment. So finding the labor to be able to deal with all these supposed new jobs is also going to be a concern. And so we see a situation where instead of it evening out, we may see a situation where prices go up and we still need to import. And
Got it.
that can be a problem. So it's a risk. It's one that right now the current administration is taking, but it means that for management, and this is where we're going to move back to you, Cindy, they're going to have a lot of questions and they've got to
Absolutely.
start planning in a world full of whiplash. Because let's be honest, in the past 2 months, 3 months, these tariffs have gone like some sort of roller coaster ride that is no fun to try to plan around.
Absolutely. So if we just sort of put a brief timeline around it, I think we have a general, is it roughly 10% tax on, let's use China for now because I think so we started out with roughly 10% across the board on Chinese goods. Then we increased it to 20% to try to encourage some sort of, I'm not sure what we were trying to encourage.
Conversation.
Okay, yeah, conversation. And then we went to 30% and there was still no conversation. And so we went to 145%. Is that correct? Do I have that
There
right?
was a little bit back and forth that you're missing there because the difference between 30 and 145 took about a week. as we
Okay.
were going back and forth with China because they were saying, oh, well, I'll take your 30 and I'll raise you to 45. And then we said, well, we'll take your 45 and we'll raise you to 90. And it went back and forth to the point where we hit at 145. And when we hit 145, China simply said, okay, I'm not going to retaliate anymore because we're already at ridiculous numbers. It's not going to make a difference if you charge me 100% or 300%. It's now not economical either way. And so we're going to
Yeah.
stop that. We're going to pause and we're eventually going to have some conversations.
So then there was a 90-day truce, which, as I understand it, is basically pausing the collection of the 145. We went back to the 30, which is
30.
still 200% more than it was before that. So it's still high. Um,
Yes.
but so we wanted to talk about Walmart because Walmart is just so ingrained in American culture. Walmart is also the everyday low prices company. So I think the question is, what is the impact of that whiplash on a provider like Walmart? How in the world do they plan for stocking? And there are so many other questions they would have, but let's take school supplies, for example.
Okay.
Like, when would they be buying those if school is in August? And, like, how we figure
It's
out
being
which
shipped
tariffs?
right now, Cindy.
Got it.
That's the
Okay.
problem. We have to think when we talk about retail, we've got a really large lead time. It's going to take about 6 weeks to transport that material over to the United States, take it off the boats. Those boats then go to corporate warehouses that then get divided into nationwide warehouses that then turn around and get into the store. This all takes a lot of time, which means that we're buying back to school materials typically in February and March, and they're getting delivered now here in May and June. And we're going to have already be purchasing potentially all of our Christmas stock. We're making those orders right now. And
Mm.
that's a real issue when we're talking about not knowing how much this stuff is actually going to cost us when it hits the border. We don't know what the economy is going to be like as a result of this. And so poor Walmart and every other place is probably looking in blind.
Yeah, so if we do the math on that, May is the 90-day truce, the 90-day pause.
Mhm,
I won't say truce, but pause. And then, so August, June, July, August is
mhm.
when those theoretically would come back. That's, in theory, is that about when Christmas deliveries start showing up at our shores?
It'll already start showing up. They'll start showing up
Wow.
in late July, but August and then early September are big time periods for the Christmas stock. Yes.
That is crazy. So they must not have any idea, how much to order for Christmas in that case.
You are absolutely right because they don't know how much they can charge. The reality is that things that they're going to be ordering for Christmas, especially toys, right? Most
Right.
toys are not made here in the United States. They're made overseas, and we don't know how much we're going to charge. This actually tends to be a product that is very elastic in demand, right? So I
Mhm.
typically set a budget of I'm going to buy my child $100 worth of toys for Christmas. It's not that I'm going to buy them 7 toys. I usually
Right.
put a dollar amount on there. So if I have to raise prices because of these tariffs, because Walmart cannot afford to eat them, we'll get back to that. Um,
Right.
but if I'm going to do it, I'm probably going to buy fewer toys. It's not that I'm not going to buy any, but instead of buying 6 toys, I may cut back all the way to 3. And so Walmart needs to make sure they're not overstocked with product that's really expensive to have over here and they can't sell.
So let's dive in. We'll kind of put the price aside. We'll save that for last because as a
Okay.
company, an everyday low price company wants to keep prices low, right? So we want to find other ways to solve this. Now, I happen to know that Walmart has been intentionally trying to diversify its supply chain. They have a heavy investment in Mexico. They've been putting that in recently with distribution centers there, but they have also been sourcing from other countries. So if you're a Walmart, is the first thing that you try to do is to source from other countries? And I think the question is then, do you already have existing relationships? Can you source? Because you don't want to just go all in with a supplier that you've never done business with before, I would imagine.
That is absolutely true. You are trying to diversify your sources, and we've already seen a lot of that already going forward. However, sometimes you just can't, right? Because the other
Mhm.
countries also do not have the factories up and running and items like that. So we have to be really careful. Think about this. Walmart has a 2.39% net margin, 2%, right? So
Wow.
think for every dollar that they sell in revenue, they only get 2 cents of profit. The ability to quote unquote eat these prices and go ahead and leave these prices really, really low is going to be very difficult. So, step one, find an alternative source that is cheaper than that's going on. We've got a problem though. We have no trade agreements out there, regardless of what country we're talking about. Okay, we have 10% across the board. Pretty much everything that's coming into the United States has a new 10% tariff. That was announced
Mm.
on April 2nd. We paused pretty much everything and said, okay, we're going to have 90 days in which to try to figure all these other out. Because on April 2nd, Liberation Day, Trump brought out this really large board with much higher tariffs than 10% on hundreds of countries, right? We're talking there are, what is it, 159 countries in the world. And I
There's a
think he
lot.
taxed
That sounds
and
about
I'm
right.
pretty, I actually think there's 158 and he taxed 159. Like there was more countries on that board than there were countries in the world, which is really interesting. Um, but he ended up putting all the prices on there, this new tariff that he's paused now. We're in pause for them as well. Um, and he said, okay, we're just charge everybody 10% right now.
Mm.
Well, who do I go to? Do I go to Vietnam, where I may go up to 52% if they can't get a trade agreement done in their 90-day window? Do I stick with China, who may have 145% in their 90-degree window or 90-day window? Do I go ahead and go over to Europe and try to find something over there where their numbers are more like 20 or 25, but aren't 10%? And I have no ability to plan. I don't
Right.
know where to go. So even if I go ahead and try to do these select adjustments, I still don't know what my ultimate price is going to be 90 days from now. And if I order now, the timeline it takes me to get them in and into my stores is probably going to eat up almost every single day of that 90-day window.
I bet. So, I happen to have done a little digging into Walmart, and some folks would argue with you. Now, I am not the person to argue with you on their margins, but I would say that I do know a little bit about Walmart's supplier practices because we've studied it in all of our business classes, and it's my understanding that they essentially get free loans on their goods because they wait to pay their suppliers. So, is it true that that strategy, that supplier management strategy affords them a higher margin, or are we really talking about a 2 to 3% margin?
We really are talking about a 2 to 3% margin in the end. So you
Okay.
are right. What you're talking about is their ability to finance their business, right?
Right,
Most smaller companies have to go out and have what's called working capital
right.
that they are financing through different sources that are much more expensive, usually equity. Um, that's there. Walmart is able to delay paying. In other words, they have a long enough lead time on their vendors that they can order the product, get it into their warehouses, get it to their stores, sell the product, and even restock. Actually, they're that good
Yeah,
before they end up having to owe the product. But the reality is, in the end, they still have to pay those vendors whatever those vendors are charging, even if they get a little bit of extra time. And as a result, they save interest because that's really what we're
right.
talking about. It's interest that they're saving, which is why Walmart's prices are
It's
cheaper
lower.
than if you go to the other local stores. So they actually pass most of that savings on to the customers. And you end up, again, 2.39%. It's just so thin. And it's not just Walmart, by the way. You go to
Oh, of course.
Target, it's like
Same thing.
3.8. If you go to Kroger, if you go to any sort of grocery store, you're going to see that 2 to 3% margin. You can go to Home Depot and Lowe's, and you're going to find more like an 8 or 9% margin. So that's much fatter, but it's not able to absorb even a single 10% price increase
Right,
and still be profitable. So
right.
already that base level, that reprieve we're getting is too much for any of these guys to eat.
Yeah. This isn't Walmart, this is Target, but I ran into one of my students the other day that had a new dress on, and she said, "Oh my gosh, I got it from Target." I said, "Can I see the tag?" So, it's a really, really weird thing to ask, but it was made in Vietnam, Anyway, just sharing, right? Not employers, corporations diversifying their supply chain. So, okay, another potential for Walmart especially because they have this sort of interest-free loan, if you will, to stock their stores. What if they decided to buy all their Christmas supplies now and front end load their inventory? What do you think that would do to them?
It's a risk, right? It is a definite risk because what happens if the economy goes into recession and now they're stuck with all that inventory? The
Mm,
only reason that Walmart can do this process is that they get a little bit longer. So while a normal store may get 60 days to pay them back, they may get 90 days. In the end, they still have to sell the product. So if I go ahead and try to front load and buy all my stuff and get it cheaper, I may have a temporary bump, but I am really risking the idea that the economy goes in the tank and people already adjust their spending habits, and I get stuck with dolls and play sets that I can't sell. And in the end, I lose more money than I was trying to save by going
yeah.
ahead and waiting to purchase.
Yeah, and I can't even imagine making those decisions, right? Especially having to make them so far in advance. So let's talk about price. I think that's ultimately, especially right at the moment, it is the big question because Walmart CEO publicly said we may have to raise prices. And then Walmart's former CEO came and lashed out and said you should be able to absorb them. So let's talk about the decision. It's my understanding that Walmart has been absorbing tariffs at this point. Is that your understanding?
That is, so they have been attempting to keep as many prices as low as possible. Now, that being said, there are a few small things that are going through that we probably aren't noticing. A lot of kind of low turnover inventory items that are there. And I only know this because I happened to buy one the other day. I bought a set of poker chips for
Yeah.
because I use them in my class. And last time I bought them a month ago, they cost me $23. I ended up buying a second set just yesterday. They cost me 30. So there
Okay.
are, and they happen to be made in China. I'm not, that just happens to be the place that they're made right now. And so they are raising prices on certain items, especially in that toy section. They're just not telling anybody at this point. Now, what they are trying to absorb are the things that you can see. And that is actually what Walmart was advertising that was coming out, that they're going to need to raise prices on things like bananas and other items that are super low margin already, and they're going to do there. You can only have so many loss leaders. Individual
Right.
products, we could absorb one or two or three. I mean, there's lots of places out there that are loss leaders. You go to Costco, you buy that chicken, it's a loss leader. You go to the Costco, you buy it, but you also buy 20 other things that have huge margins on it so they can lose something on the chicken. Right. So
Right.
when you sit there and you listen to the former CEO going out and saying, well, you can absorb some of these, I can on one or two or three things, but I
Right.
can't when it's across the board. And that's the
Right.
problem. It is going to be across the board. Everything that's coming in, regardless of whether it's from Mexico or Europe or China, has at least a 10% price increase. And I cannot do that on every product in my store.
Yeah, so as I understand it at the moment, the way you explained it there, like I see these insane 70-inch televisions at Walmart. Like I can't figure out who has a house big enough for those TVs. But so they're shoving all of the tariff or the taxes into these higher ticket items where the I think the price difference might not be felt as much, or they might be considered luxury items. And in theory, people can afford to pay if they can afford the luxury item, they can afford the tax as well, but they want to keep it low on food because people go to Walmart to shop for food, right? And so I
You
think the
got it.
idea is maybe if we get them in the door, 'cause, we can also encourage them to splurge a little bit too while they're there and help us with the tariffs. So, Walmart again, low prices. That is the draw. I go there to buy my groceries because they're significantly cheaper. And then I have another grocery store I go to where I buy all the stuff I can't find at Walmart. And so the question is, if they raise prices, are they going to lose market share? Are they going to lose trust? I mean, that is a huge question. What do you think will happen?
It's a really big question. I actually think that if Walmart has to move prices, so does everybody else. It's
Right.
not like the local Kroger or somebody else has the ability to absorb these prices that Walmart does not. Right. So you're going to probably see not nearly the shift that's there. In fact, if things start getting incrementally more expensive, you may find that you stop shopping at that second store and you try to buy a little bit more at Walmart because of those everyday low prices.
Hmm.
That's going to go. You may shift down to the generic brand. Maybe you'll shift to a couple of things that are American made now that were before you bought an import item. I don't exactly know exactly what will happen, but the reality is that if Walmart is facing this, so is everybody else. So
Right.
the fear that Walmart's going to lose market share pretty low, which is why these are the companies that probably need to come out and say, we're going to have to raise prices.
So tell me, like,
Everybody's going to have to, but
yeah.
they're the ones with the market power to say there's no way to avoid it.
Okay. So, you and I were talking about why did they say that out loud, right? Why don't you just silently raise prices? Because everybody's going to be raising prices. So, I, I'm part of me thinks I try to see both sides. Part of me thinks they wanted to see what their shareholders would say, because ultimately, if they continue to absorb all of the costs, then their earnings per share will decrease, right? So the people who are investing in them will not get the return that they got previously, and they could be pretty upset about that. I'm curious what you think about that.
I think that part of me wants to go, why did you say it out loud? Don't say it out
That's
loud.
right.
We knew it was going to happen. I mean, let's go back. Let's go back a couple of years ago. We had a lot of price inflation. A lot of
Mhm.
companies did some stuff very quietly that you didn't notice. Actually, some people started eventually noticing, such as shrinking the amount that was in the bag, but keeping the price the same. Right. So we try to do things to try to ease the price increases when we had inflation so high a couple of years ago. People were out there saying, hey, I've got to raise my price on my Lay's potato chips. Oh, I've got to go and raise my price on my bananas. No,
Right.
they were trying to do it very quietly. And you just kind of felt it as you went to the grocery store. And all of a sudden it was like, oh my goodness, my $100 bill is now 120. And I feel like I bought the exact same thing, but you're not blaming any one item in that scenario.
Mm.
Walmart sitting there and announcing it may be a really good thing. Like, honestly, it's giving the consumer the heads up. It's informing the investor, we will raise prices. We are protecting our margins. We are going to try to stay as profitable as we can because we know that in most likelihood, if we go into recession, our sales are going to get hit as well. So at
Mhm.
least we're going to protect the margins on the lower amount of sales.
Right.
At the same time, you're now making yourself a political target in this
Yeah.
scenario. I mean, let's rewind. What is this? 3 weeks ago now, Amazon had a leak. It wasn't even an announcement, right? It was a leak that they were considering putting on because they knew they were going to have to raise prices on certain things that they were going to show. Here's how much was increased because we have tariffs. So we're still
Right.
charging the same price. Here's the tariff. So here's going to be your total price. And people went ballistic. And 24 hours later, Jeff Bezos was like, no, 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 that's not going to happen. Sorry, sorry, sorry. Right. And it was a bit of a mess as people were starting to call for boycotts, etc.
Mm.
Walmart is now out there having said the same thing. And I was on YouTube. I was on my Facebook feed and bam, what do you know? There's lots of videos and TikTok type ones saying these guys made billions of dollars last year. Of course they can absorb these prices. The people who are saying that don't understand the math.
Yeah.
These 10% tariffs will add up to multiple billions of dollars so fast for a
Yeah.
company like Walmart.
And I think, so I look at it from both an investment perspective because I am an investor and I have some of my money in the market. Hopefully not a lot right now. And also shopper at Walmart. And so the shopper in me doesn't want to see my prices go up. But the investor in me says, man, Walmart is one of the stocks I want to own in a recession because I believe that more people will shop at Walmart. Now, having said that, if they absorb more of the tariffs themselves, my stock price will go down because their earnings are going down and stock price is entirely about future potential earnings, right? So if earnings go down, stock price goes down. That matters to pension funds, that matters to retirement funds, that matters to a lot of long-term investors. And so we can't just say they need to absorb the costs, actually can massively harm your retirement. And I think that's the challenge is these things are pretty complex. So if we kind of go through why they might have said it out loud, I kind of wonder if they intentionally were signaling danger that they don't want. They thrive on being low price, right? That has always been their thing. They're signaling that they just can't do it anymore without either affecting their shareholders or, well, I guess that would be it. Their shareholders, right?
It's not just affecting their shareholders, it's affecting their customers.
Right.
That's been going out and signaling, hey, I am going to have to raise prices on things like bananas and toys, et cetera, allows us as individuals to also plan. We need to understand that this is going to happen. The rates that we've had this 10% tariff now for a little over a month and a half,
Hmm.
with what's happening. We have not seen inflation associated with it. We've actually
Right.
seen that the inflation that's been coming in has actually been a little bit lower. And so we are seeing a lot of companies temporarily either delay the increase in the prices, eat them a little bit, or just playing this wait and see game of, I don't know what's going to happen yet. So I don't want to piss off my customers by doing a big price increase and then having to go back on it because of pricing. And I have all of my stock that I already had at X price that I can continue to price right now. But as I have to restock, then I'm going to start having these
Right.
pressures. So we've got this kind of delay system going on. Now the question becomes is, can I do that forever? How long can I do it? And what's that going to do to the general economy? I
Right.
actually don't have a great answer for you, but I have
I
a
don't think
feeling
anybody does.
no, I think inflation's going to be there. So if you were a manager, if you were working at Walmart right now and you were a buyer of Christmas, what would you do?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think that's the problem. I think I'd be paralyzed because I don't know. I'm probably afraid of over purchasing and you know having my performance review based on how many hundreds of millions of stock are still in the stores after Christmas. So I guess Jamie, I would underbuy. I don't know. I think, for me, I think I'd err on the side of not buying enough. Because scarcity also increases prices. But what would you do?
I agree with you. To be honest, I think that we will see some pretty skimpy shelves during the Christmas season this year because I can't plan. So I'm going
Yeah,
to kind of plan middle of the road scenarios that are happening where I'm going to have a fairly light recession because that's the middle of the road opportunity there. And that I'm going to have some tariffs that are there. I
yeah,
am going to kind of look at my individual countries and say, 10%, that's the baseline, that's the floor, right?
right,
But right now we've got 145% as the peak, and it could be much better or much worse. And
right,
I don't know. So I'm going to try to plan and be fairly conservative because we're talking about people's livelihood, my own
right.
livelihood.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing I'd say is that the folks that run companies like Walmart, they're not dumb, right? So they saw what happened with Amazon, and they knew very well what public sentiment would be when they said this out loud, and so they did it on purpose for a reason. The thing that I think is really interesting is that they do have the size to withstand a bit of frustrated customers. I think this actually might be a public service announcement more than anything, because if you think about those mid-sized companies, those small companies that have no room for error, I mean, they can't hedge their bets, and their entire years are probably made on the holiday season. And so if we think about if Walmart was trying to
That's
do
the
something
original
good,
definition of Black Friday, right? The
it's
original
exactly
definition of
right.
Black Friday is that's when we go into the black.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So, and those small mid-sized companies, they could go under because of a poor Christmas season. So, okay, Jamie, that was awesome. What have we missed?
Tariffs aren't the only issue that we're going to have. While we've been talking a lot about tariffs, there is a back door, and that's going to be the issue. And I know you know a little bit about this, Cindy, so I'm going to let you explain it.
Well, I think I just said, "Hey, Jamie, why don't they just land the ship in Mexico?" and, and so I just obviously thought that they would unload the ship in Mexico and truck all the goods up here. And you, of course, said, "Well, why don't they just land the ship in Mexico for one night and then change the manifest and send it off to the US. You called it port shopping, is that
I
right?
did. That is correct. So there is port shopping, and that happened almost instantaneously back
Okay.
in January when they announced Canada and Mexico and China the first time. All of a sudden,
Hmm.
we started seeing port shopping going on, which is to try to find that it goes from source to destination, and that's going to be that manifest that's going to tell me how much to charge for my goods. And so, understanding that this is a very quick workaround and people are already figuring this out. We're putting other stuff in place to try to prevent that. And I'm
Sure.
going to let you explain that because it's the section 302.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, I don't know if that's going to prevent it. Well, it might. It might actually. So, this must have happened on or very early on in the Trump administration that they implemented a tax law that will take effect in October. So it's delayed 180 days. And in October, I think it's Section 301. In October, they're going to start taxing ships that were manufactured in China or ships with Chinese crews, regardless of where the ship was manufactured. And the idea behind it is to increase the robustness of the US shipping industry. So, US made ships and US crews on ships. So, if you end up with a Chinese ship operated by a Chinese crew, it won't be taxed twice. It'll only be taxed once. But either of those two situations creates that tax. Now, they're going to start by taxing it uh, $50 per TEU. It's some sort of tonnage unit. I've forgotten what it is already. But in reading a lot of the literature from shipping organizations and logistics companies, it's going to cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $7.5 million per ship starting this October. And then they're going to steadily increase the prices of that TEU, that price per ton. I believe it's to $140 in April of 2026. And so essentially, we'll start out by taxing one of these ships approximately $7.5 million by spring or of April, excuse me, by April of 2026. Those taxes could be $21 million or more per ship. And I, for the life of me, cannot figure out a way to calculate what that means to a specific product, but I can only imagine that it's going to be pretty hefty. But Jamie, I hadn't even considered that that was a remedy to port shopping. I was purely thinking about it intending to, embolster or bolster the U.S. shipping industry.
Yeah, so again, we went back to the original tariffs. The tariffs were that we have on solar, that we have on EVs, that we have on
Hmm.
um, uh, semiconductors in an attempt to protect a single industry, right? Supposedly, the tariffs that we've had around the auto industry are there to try to protect the American industry. Now, the people who've been screaming the loudest about it have been the people that supposedly we're trying to protect. So we've got some issues there. But this one actually is really interesting because when you told me about this, because you were the one who found this, I immediately went to port shopping.
Yeah,
Because if you can find
interesting.
the destination, who is most likely to be in that destination? What type of crew is going to be there? What
Yeah.
type of ship is going to be sailing out of China?
Yep. A Chinese ship or a Chinese crew or both. Probably
And
both.
so you would have to unload everything and reload it onto a non-Chinese ship to avoid it, or you would have to completely change out the crew in order to
Mm.
deal with it. And my guess is if we go across the pond, there's probably some laws about having Chinese workers working in the Chinese ports.
Yeah, I bet you're right. That is so interesting. Well, we'll have to see that one, how that one plays out over time. I have no doubt we're going to come back and revisit tariffs as they continue to change. But I think you and I both wanted to highlight that there's a lot of um, work, a lot of
On
worry.
uncertainty. Let's be
Yeah.
honest, all of this comes down to one thing. We have a lot of risk on the table right now. We don't know what's going to happen. If I'm a manager, I don't know how to play this at this point, right? It's a wait and see game, I guess. Do I try to look for United States suppliers? Do I try to go to Mexico? Do I try to go to
Mm.
Vietnam or something like that? All of them are at risk at this point. And even if I knew my suppliers and figured that out, I don't know where the American consumer is going to be 6 months from now as I'm making those orders. So, What are they thinking? I have no idea, except for I don't know what to do right now.
Right.
Paralyzed
Yeah.
in fear.
So, I would love to just ask anybody who's listening to put their thoughts in the comments. What would you do if you were in Walmart's CEO's position, or in the C-suite? And then I think next time we're going to talk a little bit about well, one of my favorite folks, Warren Buffett. I'm sure he's one of your favorites as well. And this really interesting conundrum that Berkshire Hathaway has right now with all of its cash. You want to share
Yes.
any insights before we go into that next time?
Warren Buffett just announced he's leaving, well, retiring sort of, right? He's going from being CEO to chairman. But the reality is that Berkshire Hathaway is sitting on billions of cash. And when I'm having Warren Buffett invest my money for me, I'm kind of okay with double taxation. Now that it's moving over to somebody else, I'm going to wonder, why are they holding on to all that cash and that growing pile of cash that they have been unable to invest? They can't buy companies large enough at this point to invest that cash at a good return. And so the question becomes, are we starting to get to the end of Berkshire Hathaway as we know it?
That's
We may
awesome. I
see
can't wait
that.
to, yeah, I can't wait to talk about it. Thank you, Jamie. We'll see you
Thank
soon.
you, Cindy. We'll see you soon.